Eric,
Matthew.
would you love me if I was a worm?
I saw this meme the other day that was it was like a gummy worm that someone attached to a twig and took like a really nice photo of. And the caption was like, me as a supportive boyfriend to the worm.
Well, it's funny we're talking about worms, actually, because I was going to do a big old intro to this episode by doing some research and giving us some fun science information about tapeworms and other things like that. And I got about 4 minutes into one YouTube video and got so worried that I was filled with parasites that I immediately stopped, and that was the end of my ambitious intro to this episode. Barely one paragraph into a this is what it's like when you have a parasite, and I went, nope, I have 700 of them, I'm out, can't watch any more of these YouTube videos. Well, anyway, we're about to talk about a scary book. Cue the music. Hello there, scouts and worms. Welcome to The Devil's Cut, a podcast all about the media that goes bump in the night. If it's scary, spooky, or spine-tingling, we're here to talk about it. I'm Matt Young, and I'm here, as always, with my wonderful co-host,
Eric Rossi.
How are we doing today, Eric? You got worms?
No worms. Worm-free, luckily.
Well, you never know.
No, you can know. There are ways to know. There are doctors who will tell you if you're worm-free or not.
All right, well, mine hasn't told me, so I'm.
Next time, just go in there. Be like, hey, figure out my weight, my height, like they do. They put the little pencil mark count. And worm count, yeah.
Yeah, give me an accurate count. Because
worm saturation.
I go to the doctor so infrequently at this point. They've made a home. They probably got lives they live. Like, who am I to disturb them? Just want to know how many there are.
Yeah, it's always you got to make sure you have room for vacancy.
Yeah, I'm a landlord of sorts, maybe.
No,
I have the potential.
They tax you. They tax you. It's the definition of a parasite.
A reverse landlord? Is that what parasites are?
Yeah, pretty much.
All right. Well, I'm back against them.
Get a real job, worms.
Well, you know what? Because for a little bit, I was able to picture them like the Richard Scary worm, like driving the little Apple car. So I kind of had some rose-colored glasses for them for a bit. And that, I guess that is a weird enough segue into our topic for today. So this is going to be a different episode, listeners, than any we've done before. Up until now, we've mostly done movie reviews, almost exclusively new movie reviews, like new releases, right? Have we done anything that's like a throwback movie? Well, I guess we did do
the survival episode and the Christmas episode were more like
survival horror episode and the Christmas.
Yeah, they were like a jumble, but we're doing something that's not a movie for once.
Yeah, we're doing something different. So I hope you guys enjoy it. Today we are actually discussing a horror novel. One that I sort of just picked up on a whim. I was at a half-price bookstore, and I had heard of this author before, the author by the name of Nick Cutter, and I had read the brief synopsis of this novel, and so in the back of my mind, I was, I guess, sort of looking out for it whenever I would go, because I frequent half-price bookstores quite frequently. And so I just happened to, catch it at the last second. I was moving through the horror section. I saw it and I went, oh, this is a pretty good copy. And it was only $3, I think.
Oh, steal.
And I picked it, a real steal.
Real steal.
Not to be confused with the Hugh Jackman movie, which is good, but not what we're talking about. But yeah, so it is a horror novel that I picked up on a whim, and I aptly enough devoured it. I read this book faster than I would normally read any book because I just couldn't put it down. I from the second I opened it, because I was already reading other books at the time, and I was like, nope, this one is most important right now.
Would you say that the book prompted an insatiable hunger from within?
Weirdly enough, yes. It's almost like it was by design. And then I recommended it to Eric, and he too read it, and I assume enjoyed it. You finished it, right?
Oh yeah.
Yeah. So the book in question, if I haven't already mentioned it, is The Troop by author Nick Cutter. And so I figure we should start. I have a little bit of information about the author.
Tell me about this sicko.
Yeah, well, actually, so Nick Cutter, it's actually the pen name of writer Craig Davidson. He's a Canadian author. He was born in 1975 in Toronto, Ontario.
Ooh, Ontario.
Yeah, Ontario. and he actually has other published work. I couldn't find. I think it was like more like when he was a lot younger, because he actually started as a horror writer. His first published works were horror fiction. I couldn't figure out or find out. Maybe if somebody who listens to this can track it down better than I could. No idea what he wrote or what he wrote it under. It was a different pen name. But he started out as a horror writer, and then kind of like meandered his way over to more mainstream fiction. I guess he's known for a novel called Rust and Bones, which is a short story anthology. He was also known for, I think it's called The Fight. He's actually a amateur boxer as well.
Yeah, I saw that he did some kind of boxing event to promote his boxing book and went on a 16-week steroid cycle to beef up in time.
Yes, he did. Yeah.
Fucking insane.
Yeah, pretty wild, right? And I did find an interview, an article that had an interview with him, and basically it was a lot of him talking about how he wanted to do that because he finds that in our modern society, we people don't really get pushed to their limits ever, because everything is designed for convenience,
comfort.
So this was something he wanted to do to really see what he was made of, I guess. I believe he lost. I think he did 2 fights and he lost both of them. But boxing, if you just do a boxing match, I think that's a win, because
yeah, man, getting in that square is no joke.
It's fucking crazy, man. I couldn't even imagine it. So, props to him. And also a pretty cool idea. I appreciate his commitment to the craft.
Yeah, seriously.
But yes, he actually, and fun fact, he's also published under a different name. He has a third, possibly fourth pen name.
This Carmen Sandiego motherfucker.
Yeah, Patrick Lestuca, which I think is not a great one. Sorry, Craig, but that one not my favorite. I hope you stick with Nick Cutter and Craig Davidson. You could probably let Patrick go. Just let him go.
He wrote his books.
But yeah, so he's known under all his pen names for writing Rust and Bones, The Troop, which is what we're talking about today. Also another horror novel called The Deep. That's another Nick Cutter endeavor. Same with Little Heaven. And I believe the one Patrick Lestuca book that is most well known, or at least the one that stood out to me the most and I thought was a funny title, was a book called Mother Bitch Fight.
What a fucking title. Holy shit.
No, I didn't have time to look into that particular story, but I'm interested, title alone. So, maybe Patrick can come back. We'll see. We'll do an update on whether or not Mother Bitch Fight is worth checking out.
I hope it's about nuns, Mother Bitch Fight, and not Mother Bitch Fight.
like a nun fight club.
Yeah, I'm there.
Nun Fight Club, that's a pitch. We could take that to Hollywood right now. But yeah, so he attended Trent University and the University of New Brunswick, all both Canadian universities. And aside from that, I mean, I wasn't able to dig up too much else about his life. I mean, he was born, he grew up, he was interested in writing, did a lot of short story work in his adolescence. Went to a couple universities, and he's had a pretty successful writing career. I mean, he's able to go crazy with the pen names.
Yeah, I mean, you didn't dig up any worm-based trauma in his past?
No, I guess we should. So that's the history of Craig Davidson, Nick Cutter. I guess we should get into the book itself. So this is The Troop. I don't have the exact release date. That's one thing I didn't write down.
I believe it was like 2014, right?
2014, a 2014 release. What's the breakdown of the story? Spoiler free, Eric.
I haven't read the back cover, but it would probably go something along the lines of very small Canadian Boy Scout troop goes out to a island off the coast of their small town.
An island off the coast of an island.
They go there for a survival retreat weekend with their one scoutmaster, and once they arrive at the island, they find that a shockingly thin man has washed ashore in a shitty little boat, and things just get worse and worse and worse after that, really.
Over the course of the book, the rest of the troop also becomes very, very hungry. And that is that's essentially what the back cover of the book says. I read it, but I haven't read it recently, so
it's really all you need. After the first night, it really just starts to suck you in and draw you in, and you just need to know what happens.
Yeah, so let's just jump right into our feelings of the novel. How do you feel about it? What would you like? Give us your review, your rating.
Oh, it was good. It was real good because I feel bad. I felt real bad the entire time. I felt real bad when I was done with it. I felt bad for about a day thinking about it, and that's a good thing. I think it's a very good book. It's very well written as far as like an adult man trying to write 5 separate individual boys. I think it's a really difficult thing to try and like write dialogue as a child. And
sure,
there's, I'm sure there's some kind of localization differences between like the way they talk, but I think he did a pretty good job of encapsulating what it's like to be in that kind of setting. I myself was a Boy Scout, and I remember what it was like to be surrounded by a bunch of other kids that were and were not my friends, and what that kind of group dynamic was like. And I definitely, found myself identifying with different characters at different points throughout that dynamic.
Yeah, I agree. I think he does. I think he does a really good job. I read some reviews, both like professional reviews and like Goodreads kind of stuff, just like personal reviews from users, that type of site that seem to have like a problem with the dialogue of the kids. But I don't know, I didn't find really much issue. I think a lot of the time the dialogue didn't seem like something like maybe kids would actually, like how kids would actually speak to each other like in real life, but it definitely felt natural in the, like, if you I feel like when you're reading books, dialogue is always going to be like a little stilted unless you're like a absolute master at like character interactions.
Yeah, I mean it's
but I felt like I there was never a point where I was like, oh well, this is taking me out of the novel. Like it occasionally you'd have a line where I'm like, well, that sounds a little bit funny, but like never enough for me to hate it. I think he actually does a very good job of characterizing the kids in this book, as well as the one or two adults that we really interact with. And there are lots of other extra. This is a fun word I learned today. Extra textual.
Ooh. What are you studying for the SATs? What the fuck is that?
Exactly. Yeah, look at that. So yeah, one thing about the book is that it takes a lot of formatting from Stephen King's seminal book Carrie.
Ooh.
So basically,
Yeah,
the book.
I didn't realize that.
Yeah, so the book takes place. In real time, you're interacting with the kids on this island and their scoutmaster, but the chapters are kind of split up by having like sort of like interviews with military personnel and like or news coverage, things like that take place well after the events of the book, and they're sort of like spliced in to give you extra context like of what's happening. None of the characters get any of that information, but you do, and it is the same thing that happens in Carrie. Because in Carrie you're following just this young girl who's about to annihilate a whole town with her budding psychic abilities. But King would intersperse the chapters with like, oh, and remember that time that one girl destroyed that whole town, or like, oh, now we know so much about psychic abilities because of this one incident. It's like,
or like interviewing survivors and shit like that.
Yeah, I've read interviews with Nick Cutter that like Carrie was a direct inspiration. The formatting of it, and I think it's such a good way to tell a story, this kind of story, to give the readers context, but to keep the characters like ignorant. I think it's just a very interesting way to write, and I'm like so surprised that like I haven't encountered more stories that are formatted that way. I'm sure there are plenty.
I mean, it kind of makes sense. It's the same kind of thing of where, like, you're watching a horror movie and you know that there's a monster lurking around because you've seen the silhouette, you've seen the evidence, but, the characters may not have the same vantage points that you do as the viewer. So you kind of get that tension built in as you're, like, moving from scene to scene because you're learning more about the background shit that they don't know about. And I think it's a really effective way to kind of mount fear.
Definitely. As far as my feelings of the book go, I absolutely loved it. Like I said in the beginning, this book like hooked me right out of the gate. I think there's just like Cutter does such a good job of building like dread, because I'd say that's like the biggest like type of fear that this book gives you is just this overwhelming sense of dread, because once shit starts to kick off in this, as a reader, you can't possibly see a way out of this situation for these kids. And it's just, what's coming, and you get to watch as they all slowly start to realize and come to terms with it. And it's just, he just builds it up so well. It's very, very, very scary in a way that like I usually don't get too afraid, like actually scared when I'm reading like a horror novel. I've read like a number of King books at this point. I've read Carrie, I've read The Shining, I've read a bunch of his short stories, working my way through The Stand at the moment. And I think The Stand is actually probably the closest thing to this because it's a disease story or an illness story, so this was like, that was like as close to this, as I've gotten with King's work. But yeah, it just really hit all the things that I'm looking for in a scary book that I didn't think I would necessarily like get to experience, because I thought maybe like I was too far gone, I'm too
jaded,
overexposed to horror.
Overexposed is exactly where I was going.
I was like, I'll never be afraid of a book. And this one like it got me there. It did make me like paranoid. So
I mean, it certainly made me squirm. He does a really good job of accessing like the appropriate senses, like in a scene. Mm-hmm. But yeah, they talk a lot about the different textures of things and like the different smells, and like obviously in all writing that's kind of what you need to do to draw people in and like get people in that space so they can kind of suspend disbelief. But I think he just does a really good job of pairing the exact, sense experience to what the kids are going through. And he does a lot of contextualizing what the kids are feeling based on previous experiences that the kids have gone through. Like, he does a really good job of kind of setting up their backstories and their personalities and their own experiences to inform what's going on in the scene.
Yes, I loved anytime that happened. It was such a good way to build like empathy for the characters.
Yeah, like throughout a lot of their interactions, it'll be like a specific scenario and then a memory of one of the kids that informs you why the kid is going to react the way he does, or why he reacted the way he did.
Yeah, it's a great little device that he comes up with to really make you understand and identify with the characters. So I guess we should like kind of like break down the characters a little bit. It's because it's pretty short. It's a pretty short list. You have the Scoutmaster, who is Dr. Tim Riggs. He's like the local MD. So the story takes place in Canada, specifically in on an island that I don't remember the name of exactly at the moment.
It is a real island, though. I looked it up.
It is, yes. But the characters all hail from this one island town, and so Tim Riggs is the like local like general practitioner essentially. He like, and the book goes into how like there's like really interesting little introduction story about how he like didn't have, he admits to himself that he like didn't have the chops to become a like a big time surgeon or anything, and so he just kind of settled for being like a big fish in a small pond and moved to this island. And he just kind of is okay with it. And he became a local scoutmaster, and every year he takes his troop out to this island called Falstaff Island, which is, I don't think, a real island, but it is fictionally off, like, a few miles off the coast of the main island. And he has, what is it, five kids in his troop, which I don't know, is that small? You're the ex-scout.
This whole scenario felt small to me. Like, I did Boy Scouts from the time I was like in elementary school until I was like, I think they call it a first class scout. So I was like, I want to say like towards the end of middle school. I don't remember the exact time period, but we had like a ton of kids. We had like a ton of kids and a ton of scoutmasters. There was like usually one head dude and then like a couple others. So it was kind of like interesting to see that, play out with such a small group, but also contain all of the like same dynamics that I was like used to. So, like, all of these characters, especially the kids, they kind of slot into their own little, like, it's kind of stereotypical character for these situations, but they get fleshed out, like, really well into, like, individuals that I could recognize, but also felt unique.
Mm-hmm. Prince Edward Island is the name of the island. Thank you, Spooky Fiance. Is the name of the island they come from, which is the real island.
Yes.
But yeah, so we have, as far as characters go, we have Scoutmaster Tim Riggs, and then the 5 scouts themselves. We have Ephraim, who is sort of like the resident bad boy, I guess you would say.
He's prone to fits of
rage. He's like to sneak off and smoke his cigarettes.
Like a daredevil kind of kid.
Yeah, we have Kent, who is like the jock. He's just like a kid who's developed very early. He's a big tough boy.
He's the cop's son, right?
And he's the local sheriff's son. So he's got some like big tough guy energy going on. We have Newton, or Newt as he's named, and he is like the quintessential nerd. We have Max, who is he is Ephraim's best friend, but he's sort of the kind of every kid, I would say. He doesn't have like one particular trait that like really defines him. He's sort of just like the middle of the road kid. And then we have Shelly, who is the resident creepy kid. The one kid that like is there, and everyone kind of like hangs out with him, but no one's gonna like go out of their way to invite him to stuff.
He's the weirdo. He's the fucking weird kid. He's the kid that you go home and you tell your parents, you're like, hey, this kid's fucking bizarre.
Well, not really though, because you're too busy. The reason why Shelley kind of skates by is because he joins in with the group in making fun of Newton, right? Because as long as there's that one kid that everybody can get behind making fun of, like, you can kind of blend in.
I mean, I personally, I'd be flagging Shelley way before I flagged Newt. Like, granted, Newt's a big fat nerd,
is modern.
but like...
This is modern, Eric. You have to
No, even
Scout
back then,
Eric.
trust me, I had some real mutants in my fucking Boy Scout troop. Like, to the point where we would go to, like, they call them jamborees, where you show up with other, like, scout troops.
Oh, I know
and,
about
like,
the jamborees.
So, yeah, you show up at one of these things, and I'm looking around, I'm like, all of those kids look like normal kids, and then I turn around, and half of mine are eating their own boogers. I'm like, what are we doing?
Yeah, you got like 6 Shellys hanging out behind you, and you're like,
I got a bunch of mutants. Bunch of fire starters.
Yeah, so those are the main kids, and then we have I guess the next important character would be Tom Paget, or the Hungry Man, and we don't know a lot about him, but he is sort of the inciting character that really kicks off this book. So do we, like, at this point, do we want to get into our spoiler territory?
I think we both recommend this book, right? I think this is a pretty good read. It's a pretty fast read. I think it's like 400 something pages.
Yeah, depending on which, version of the book. Like, if you're reading, like, the hardcover, the mass market, the regular old paperback. But yeah, it's a short read, real quick, and man, will it hook you. If you can get your hands on it, if you're listening to this podcast already, you're into horror, you'll like this book. It is a very body horror forward novel.
Yeah. Big trigger warning for body horror. Huge.
Trigger warning for body horror, but even bigger trigger warning for animal abuse.
Oh my god.
I think honestly that might be the one thing that turns people off from this book more than anything else. is the animal abuse.
Yeah, I have a friend reading this book currently, and they text me the other day. They're like, look, I had to skip past this part. It was rough.
Yeah, which we will get to.
I would say
beyond
it's
that,
a lot of animal, sort of clinical experimentation on animals, and
it's not good. You're not going to like it. Eric's not going to make it sound any better. It's bad. So just, trigger warning for animal cruelty. And if you really, really can't handle body horror, I'd say maybe avoid it. But
go
I
home.
don't even think the body horror is that bad.
Go home.
Yeah,
just
we'll
don't.
also go home. But also, I don't think the body horror stuff is that bad. It certainly makes you squirm. But I don't think it's, it's not like having to watch, all 36 Saw movies, it's not that kind of body horror. But just keep that in mind. But it is a huge
it's not the
recommend
goriest
from me.
book, but it is pretty gruesome.
Yeah, definitely. But yeah, huge recommend from me. I'd say if you like to read, scary books, this one is definitely worth checking out, barring, whether or not you can handle certain things. But I'd say pick it up. Eric, I believe, recommends it.
Yeah, I would say just, for me, this story was like quicksand. It was like, oh, okay, well, I'm in it, and I can't get out of it, and it's just getting worse and worse and worse and worse and worse. And I enjoyed myself throughout. I thought it was a very well put together story, but I'd say if you can't handle dread, this is not it. This is not it for you.
All right. So, with that being said, let's hit the old transition noise and get on to our spoiler part of this episode.
Yes. So from here out, we're going to be speaking relatively in chronological order. We're not recapping the whole book like we do with the movies.
We're not going to do that to you guys.
We're just going to...
Otherwise, we'll be here. Well, it'll be the first ever, 13-hour podcast.
But with that in mind, cue the transition.
So, into the spoilers. And before one more thing before we get started on that. So it's pretty safe to assume you yourself might have even compared this book to Lord of the Flies. I think anybody would, right?
I think it's the easiest one-to-one comparison. You have a group of young boys who are in a survival situation, stranded on an island.
Right. Exactly. And I actually have a quote from Nick Cutter when asked about comparisons to Lord of the Flies. And he does say, and this is a quote, "It was a big influence and touchstone while writing, along with the Japanese novel Battle Royale, and probably Hunger Games a little too. Along with Stephen King's novella..." Yeah, see? "Along with Stephen King's novellas The Body, The Ruins, and some other books. Now, I don't know if people who liked Lord of the Flies will dig The Troop, or potentially vice versa. That's a different question. I think publishers need to signpost upcoming books for readers with, if you liked X book, you got to try book Y. It's part of the business." So basically, he's very aware that this comparison is, but it's really the only way to sell stuff these days. It was certainly an inspiration, but I also found the Battle Royale thing.
Yeah, that was interesting. Didn't expect that.
Yeah, which is actually a novel that I do plan to read, because I've only ever seen the movie, but I've always wanted to read the novel of it that it was based off of. So that one's probably gonna be.
You have fun. I'll be reading the manga.
Oh, come on! The book is gonna be brutal, man. I'll give you the cliff notes of the book when I read it. But yeah, I just thought that was an interesting his inspiration. Have you ever watched The Ruins? I also plan to read that book as well. But The Ruins is one of my favorite horror movies.
I don't believe so.
Oh, that's gonna be a future, maybe not a future episode, but
Google.
You and me are gonna watch that one, and we can talk about it. But yeah, so let's get on to the the discussion of the book. So the book sort of opens up with what I thought was really funny was how it opens with a radio transmission of it's sort of like a tabloid article about this guy called what do they call him? It's like Hungry. They don't call him the Hungry Man. They call him like Starvin' Marvin, I think.
They give him lots of names. All these different publications love to put their own little spin on the guy's nicknames.
Yeah, so yeah, it is Starvin' Marvin. So they it opens up with a little article that's presumably published by a local tabloid from Prince Edward Island. And it's all about how this waitress at basically a Denny's, more or less, had to serve this super skinny dude, and he ordered 70 grand slams and ate all of them. and just and even that wasn't enough. The waitress would come back and he'd be munching on napkins, because he just couldn't get enough. But at the same time, this dude was gaunt. He was might as well be a fucking mummy, right?
Yeah.
And the account, it's just an eyewitness account of this waitress being well, yeah, I had this guy and he just was crazy. He was so skinny and he ate so many eggs, and then that was it. And I just thought it was funny because it was a perfect tabloid article, and what a great way to kick off the book. This is what had me hooked. I was oh, this book's funny. Not only is I trust that it will be scary, but this guy's got like a good sense of humor about the genre too, especially because like at the end of the article it goes, hey, if you liked this article you might enjoy, and I have it pulled up, you might enjoy Cheeseburger Kills Space Alien, Beelzebub Captured by GIs in Iraq, Hellspawn Baby Runs Amok in Tepeo, and El Chupacabra Drains Toddler's Blood in Public Park. And it just was a throwback too, because I used to collect all those. I had like a weird one of those ants that's not really an ant when I was a kid, and she used to always drop off weird New Jerseys for me.
Nice. This is a good aunt.
And yeah, good aunt, not aunt. She was great. shout out to Aunt Trudy. And she so like it just was like a real, I was like, oh man, throwback to my childhood of reading these stupid articles like fucking about the Jersey Devil like getting a part-time job and shit like that. I loved it. So yeah, I thought it was a really good way for him to open the story, just like a quick little article. And it also it's funny, but it is also it makes you right away go like, well, what's going on with that guy? Because obviously
we cut right away from that, you know?
Yeah. A brief little snippet of like the hungry man, and he's like sailing to so like we said earlier, the book takes place on this small island called Falstaff Island, but it's just like a tiny island off the coast of a different, much bigger island, which is Prince Edward Island, which is an actual place. So our main characters are all already there, and the Scoutmaster's there with them. And the hungry man is like, I think he like has hijacked a boat or something, and he's like sailing his way there, and he sees like that there's light there from like the campfires or whatever. And I only am going over this like exact series of events because there's like a quote from the book that I'd like to dramatically read for you.
A dramatic reading from
yeah, because there's a certain. I think there's this one part which I read to Spooky Fiance as like I had read it in the car as we were driving because we were on a road trip, and I was like, this is so gross and good. Like this book's gonna be awesome, and I read it aloud to her, and I think it just does such a good job of demonstrating what type of horror you're in for in this book. And so like this is the hungry man in his hijacked boat like pulls up to the island and shores up the boat, and so we'll pick up right from there. So this is direct from the book.
Setting night,
Falstaff Island. A storm is brewing off the coast. That's not the book, but that is what's happening. Here we go. The man crawled up a stony beach, skidding on the water-smooth pebbles. The rocks were slick with cold, snot-like algae. He scooped it up and shoveled it into his mouth, sucking the dark green strings through his lips like a child slurping egg noodles. There, skittering along, its exoskeleton glossed in the moonlight, a sand crab. His hand closed over it, its ocean coldness wept into his flesh, and stuffed it between his lips. He felt it dancing along his tongue with its hairy little legs. He bit down. A gout of salty goo squirted into his mouth. Its pincer snipped the tip of his tongue in a death spasm, bringing the penny-bright taste of blood. He swallowed the twitching bits convulsively, the spiny exoskeleton tearing into the soft tissue of his throat, which felt so thin now, nothing but a fleshy drainpipe. The skin stretched tight as a crepe over his esophageal tube.
Ugh.
Right? Like, that is like, it was immediately like, oh, this book gonna be icky.
Yeah, once he started scooping the algae into his mouth, I was like, oh, brother's down bad. Oh.
The algae is one thing, but the like cutting his own throat on like crab exoskeleton was like a whole
Carapace.
other, and it like like, ugh, man, it really like took it to another level. So yeah, basically what we're dealing with here, since we're in spoiler territory, is this
is it worm time?
Like, no, not yet. This guy is so hungry that like whatever he's come down with, he's so hungry that he will eat anything. There's even like a passage where he like thinks to himself about how he like passed while he was driving. He like passed some roadkill, and he was like, "Oh, I'm not that hungry." And then like a minute later, he's like, "Fuck, I should have ate that raccoon."
I'd club a seal to eat
Like-
that raccoon now.
Yeah. So like that's the type of hunger you're dealing with in this book. And so I guess to speed it along, basically the hungry man, he shows up to the house. Tim, the scoutmaster, is at first a little apprehensive about letting him in, but like he's also a doctor, right? So he's like got sort of
he's
this,
torn by his Hippocratic oath. He's like, oh,
Right,
there's
it's
kids
always
in
the- it's
here. I
always the
really don't
oath.
want to let you in, but also like you are dying.
Do doctors really is that a thing, or is that just a TV show thing? Like, is there really
It's
a
a thing.
Hippocratic oath?
No, there's
like,
a real,
do they
yeah,
actually
it's a real
swear
thing.
They swear on a like a caduceus, and then they go, I will always protect people. Like, is that really what happens?
Yeah, it's a real thing. I don't know when it happens, but I think it happens at graduation. And they're that's their duty.
Interesting.
They gotta
always
save
thought that
people.
I always thought that was a Hollywood deal. The hypocrite, kind of like the how in like police shows, there's all this like there's like the one phone call and like everything's always-
Yep.
There's very strict order, but in real life, you're like, none of that actually is going to happen to you if you ever get arrested. I thought it was one of those things, like, oh well, they say that doctors take this oath, but yeah. So Tim Riggs, he's like, we get a. At first, I thought he was going to be like the main character of the book. Like I thought it was going to be he has to take care of these kids until the bitter end, but that very quickly became obviously irrelevant to me. I was like, oh, never mind. Because basically, what happens is Tim lets the hungry man into the cabin. All the kids are like, they get woken up, and we get like a fun little like the first scene with all the kids like wake up in their bunks and like fucking make fun of each other for a whole chapter. Did you ever see that movie Heavyweights with
Oh, I love Heavyweights. I was just talking about Heavyweights with my brother yesterday.
Dude, Heavyweights. All I could think of when I was reading that chapter was when they go like, chipmunks download, and they like fucking stick all their meat sticks and M&Ms in all the hiding crevices of their bunk. Which is also, it would have been great for the people in this book, because having all those extra snacks really would have helped them.
Wouldn't have gone very far, but it would have been good for about a second.
Would have stalled. Yeah, would have stalled another day or two in the book. But yeah, so the kids all get woken up, and we get like a cool brief little introduction, and we kind of broke it down earlier. All the characters basically fit into sort of a stereotype. They all get their little like archetype characters, right? But like Eric, what you had said was that the Nick Cutter does a really good job of expanding on them later. Like he kind of lays out like, oh, this is the nerd, this is the jock, this is the creepy. But as the book goes on, you get more characterization from them via their flashbacks, and I think that's a great way to do it. Like set up the archetypes and let us know where like sort of like the what the lay of the land is, and then give us the extra bits as we go. I think that's a great way to do it.
I gotta put a flag in the ground here on this specific instance, because the way that he goes about describing all of these kids to us initially is via scent, because the scoutmaster is like, yeah, boys all have a different scent and they slot into these categories, and that's how they kind of like break them down into their like little things. And I found that to be so unappealing. I was like, oh no. You should not have any of these kids' scents memorized. Maybe if you have one stinky kid and like maybe
Tim.
one ultra clean kid, but outside of that, I'm uncomforted by the fact that this man knows all of these kids' smells.
Right. You know what? But that's it. But that's a perfect way to do it too, because it makes you uncomfortable right away. Even though this is the guy that you're like supposed to be depending on, because he's the only adult with them, right? So
yes, this is our Gibraltar. This is our rock.
He has already trained you to be like, this is our main guy. He's the adult here. We should all trust him. And then he immediately offsets that by being like, well, now he knows what all the kids smell like, and you're like, well.
I don't find any other parts of his character to be like, oh, this is problematic. But there was just something off-putting where I was like, Stop talking to me about boy smells. I hate the phrase.
Right, but I loved that though. It's one of those things, like, you know, I think for all intents and purposes, Tim Riggs is like a regular guy. He's like a good guy. He just, for some reason, that's how his brain, you know, connected this. Is it creepy? Absolutely. But
he's a doctor, so that happens.
Sometimes people have just like it's possible to be a totally normal functioning person and have like one creepy thing you think about. I'm sure everybody does. and I think that highlighting it though and introducing the characters that way is putting you in like a perfect uncanny valley, like as a reader, and you're like, oh, I don't, like, I'm already like, even though I'm supposed to feel comfortable here, I don't. And what a great device. Like I think he's really, this guy's got horror. Like, he knows what he's doing, even in like these quiet early moments before it really sets in, you know, and we'll talk about what happens then. But anyway, so we get introduced to the kids and how they smell. And the Hungry Man, you know, is just looking for food, and Tim's like, you know, I'll give you food. And eventually, like, it coalesces to a sort of confrontation where the Hungry Man just like vomits algae into Tim's face. And if we know anything, we already kind of know this is a disease tale. So right away we're like, well, all right, Tim's fucked, I guess.
Bye, Tim. Nice knowing
character?
You.
Yeah,
nice
right.
Meeting you, Tim.
It's so funny because Tim spends multiple chapters being like, maybe I'm not sick, and then you're like, no, Tim, you're done. Give me a new character.
I don't think I've ever seen anyone got vomited, like in media, gets vomited on their face and doesn't end up dead.
Yeah, we'd have to do some research on that one, but I think you're right.
Drag me to hell.
No, she ends up dead.
Oh, I guess she ends up dead.
She most definitively ends up dead. Yeah, so essentially what we come to learn as the book goes on, Tim sort of sends the kids out for a while to do like he's like, oh, don't ignore the dying man in the room.
Yeah, he tries to kind of put a divide between the kids and the weird dying man situation. He's like, you guys go out into the woods, follow this trail, and go do all the things you're supposed to do for your merit badge. Take this walkie-talkie. I have a walkie-talkie. We'll get all this stuff sorted out, and we'll be back to our camping trip. They don't get back to their camping trip.
Right. Well, they do come back. The kids go out, and there's a fun little, you know, adventure where we get introduced to more of the dynamics of the kids. And there's a lot of really good writing that goes on. You know, we get introduced to how, like, so Ephraim is like this real angry, like, loner kid, but he's best friends with Max. And he's only angry because like his dad is like a convicted felon and he's like a violent criminal, and he's like angry because he probably, as somebody who also inherited, I identified with Ephraim a lot because I inherited anger issues from my father, and so like I understand being mad about being mad because your dad sucks.
Yeah, that's a tough one.
Yeah, so like I identified with him a lot. But then you have like Kent, who's just like so confident because he's got like cop dad, you know, and his cop dad was like, well, this is what being a man is, and this is what's right, and this is what's wrong. And Kent's like, well, I'm king shit, right? I think that's literally like a quote that they use in the book is like, Kent's like, I'm king shit.
Yeah, king shit at Poop Mountain.
Yeah, and you just get like a lot of really good like kid interaction that, again, some people seem to find their dialogue with each other stilted and maybe unnatural, but I thought it felt pretty good.
I think it's just so impossibly difficult to capture the chaos of what it's like to be in a group of 5 boys who are all trying to communicate over one another.
Right, because when you're a kid, like everybody's talking all the time. Most of the time, everyone's screaming. You know, it's like, how do you write that? You can't possibly directly mimic it and make it like a good thing to read. You know? Like you have to do some dramatization, and I think he does a really good job. While the kids are out, like that's when like Tim starts to do, like, he basically comes to the conclusion that this dude is like dying, and whatever, like, he's so hungry because, like, again, we have to remind you guys that like the way they describe this dude is he's like one step away from skeleton.
Yeah, essentially 0 fat, 0 muscle, skin and bones. Like, throw him in a hole. He's done.
Yeah. Like, this is like an Evil Dead creature we're dealing with here. And he's just so hungry. And I loved the way we set up the dread right away. Once Tim got, like, the vomit in his mouth, you know? Mm-hmm. They don't even say anything about it, but the next morning, the kids wake up and, like, one of the kids notices that, like, 3 hot dog bun bags are in the trash.
Yeah, Scoutmaster Tim been eating.
Yeah, and it's like such a good little, like, oh, the kids wouldn't really make anything of it. They just notice it and be like, oh, that's where'd those hot dog buns go? But they don't know what we know is that, like, there's a scary hunger disease coming your way, you know. But I loved the way they do that. He did that, where you're from the kids' perspective, they're not too worried about it, but we automatically are like, oh, Tim.
Yeah, and then things go really downhill for Tim. I think he says he loses like 25 pounds within like the first
12 hours.
Day. Oh, it's the first 12 hours? Good God.
Yeah. Yeah, he loses, I think it might be more than that he says. So it immediately makes, like, the situation so dire, because you're like, oh shit, if we're losing this much weight in this small amount of time, this disease is just going ham.
Yeah, accelerating.
Like, if all, yeah, so it's absolutely crazy. And so Tim eventually realizes, you get a couple chapters from his point of view, where he's sort of like, he's in denial at first, and then he's like comes to accept it, but like only barely. But he's like, all right, I gotta cut this guy open, mostly because he's dying and I want to save him still, because I don't know, Hippocratic oath or whatever. And he's like, I'm trying to save this guy, but also in the back of my mind, I'm really trying to save me and maybe the kids, but mostly me, but also the kids. And so once the kids get back, he like takes Max, who is our like sort of straight man in this story, and goes, hey, I need you to help me, because Max's dad is like the local coroner and also part-time taxidermist, because it's that kind of island where it's like you have to do both. I'm surprised he wasn't also the dentist.
Doctor, barber, electrician.
Exactly. It's one of those types of islands. It's like a fucking midnight mass over here. And so he has Max come in and assist with like this live autopsy, where he's like, we got to cut this guy open and do something to try and save him. And this is where I did you think this was, I thought this was a big reveal, but were you surprised by this reveal? I mean, we've already kind of revealed it based on the intro of this episode.
There were some very specific verbs used in the first few chapters that made me think that it was a guys, if you didn't know, it's a parasite.
It's a parasite. If we hadn't already.
But yeah, there were some things that were said along the way that made me go, oh, this is a parasite. But when it happened, when they're doing this kind of like live autopsy on this guy, and the parasite like kind of wiggles its head out of this guy's stomach and like looks around and sniffs the air, I was like, oh, these are not normal parasites. This is big time gross.
This ain't your daddy's tapeworm.
If you guys can recall, My Best Friend's Exorcist, there was like an 8-foot tapeworm that crawled out of a girl's mouth and like floated its way across the room after it got like bit by the dog.
Exactly. That's the type of parasite we're dealing with.
Yeah, they're enormous. They're big, and there's lots of them.
Yeah, when we talked about My Best Friend's Exorcism, me and Eric were both like, that's not how tapeworms work. But it was spooky and fun to watch. But in this book, that is how this worm works. Like it was actually accurate to this book.
Yeah, it is super gross. It's not like your mom's tapeworms. These ain't normal tapeworms. We find out later on in the book that these have been genetically developed initially as a diet tapeworm, with a kind where you take them in a pill form and then you take another pill to get rid of the, worm infestation once you've hit your desired, weight or whatever. But along the way of developing these tapeworms, the scientists in charge, realize that, oh, we can make these way worse and sell them to governments as a weapon.
I kind of read it. I read it as if so. There was basically two scientists that were like ultimately working on it. So the main one is Dr. Clive Edgerton. I don't have the name for his sort of like subordinate that they interview a lot during the chapters. I kind of read it as he sort of pitched it as a diet pill for rich people, but ultimately, because he's such like a chaos scientist, that he was always in it. Like,
oh, you think that was all his intent from the get-go?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, I mean, not necessarily for money, whether it's from rich people dieting or the military. I think it was always he wanted to see how murderous he could make these worms.
Mm-hmm.
Just because he's one of those just like chaos scientists who's like all about coulda and not about shoulda. You know,
yeah.
Like, can I do this?
A real Dr. Eggman.
Like, yeah, a real Dr. Wily or Dr. Eggman. We know them. You know, he's got a crazy mustache. We know for sure. Whether they describe it or not, we know that thing's going in 70 different angles.
But yeah, we find out that it's a worm. This is a worm.
It's a worm.
Big bad worm, and it's super gross. Worm details.
It's like he calls it like it's called like a hydratid, which is like a variation of tapeworm, like most common in like dogs and animals like that. But in this version of the tapeworm or the hydratid, they break it down again in one of the articles later that like basically it spawn the one worm will spawn like constantly be spawning eggs and new worms, but it forms like two like different types. There's like the conqueror worm and like the devourer worm, and like the devourer worms only like exist to like eat and drain people so they can feed the one main worm.
Yeah, they just siphon the body down to nothing, so that way
they reproduce like fucking instantly. Like it's just constant.
Yeah,
like, if you
like
get one
cells.
worm in you, you get one worm in you, you got all the worms in you,
and they're everywhere. Those ones are all over the place.
They're waterborne. They're airborne. Like, because there's a point where so we see when Tim and Max are like cutting up the guy, the first encounter with the worms, the worm like sort of like you know like squirms out, and it's like and it's huge, right? Like I didn't really have a good idea. I think in my brain I imagined it a lot bigger than it probably actually was described as. But even then, anything really coming out of you that's like relative to a garden hose is probably huge, you know?
Yeah, it's about the size of it's about the width of a garden hose, but it's all coiled up in his guts. The one that sneaks out is our conqueror worm, right? The conqueror worm does this gross thing where it like tries to like sniff the air, and it like spits out these little like worm spores all over the place. It like just pukes them out all over.
It goes like it like spits worm like eggs into the air and hopes that they land on something that they can like worm their way inside of. I guess no pun intended.
It's so gross.
And the way he writes it, it's so icky. And it's so scary, because, like, how do you get away from this? Right?
You do not.
This whole scenario, I'm like, oh, it's bad.
There's really no way around it, especially, like, in the isolation of this island. It's just so very bad. The smaller worms, the other worms, the devourer worms, spread all throughout your body. Under your fingernails and your eyeballs and your teeth, whatever it can get to, it's going to get there. While the conqueror worm is specifically designed to stay in your guts as long as possible, and get as big as it possibly can. So then it can leave the body and propagate the species.
Yeah, and get as far as it can to hopefully find something else. Like, oh, how terrifying. Oh, I hate it. And so that's what we're dealing with, right? We're dealing with this, like, scenario where, like, even, like, the smallest mistake can get you infected because, like, these things, again, are, like, airborne. You can get them from touching something that's infected. Like, it seems Nick Cutter does a great job of making it seem like avoidable, but also unavoidable at the same time. Like, avoidable if you know what's happening, but unavoidable if you're a bunch of, like, 10-year-olds, right?
Yeah, you kind of like immediately set yourself into this, like, defensive mode of, like, okay, we don't know how it's being spread, so we have to assume that anything could spread it. And that just instills, like, an insane amount of paranoia. And let me tell you, paranoia, isolation, and a bunch of boys does not go well.
Dude, yeah, no, it doesn't, because basically
that's a recipe for disaster.
So basically, the what we get from here on out is eventually the kids realize that, like, Tim is infected, and big old bad boy Kent decides to take charge, and because by this point in time, Tim Riggs is, like, maybe 50 pounds. Like, because he's been being devoured alive for, like, he's been being devoured alive by worms for, like, 2 days. So he's, like, nothing. So they all, like, toss him into a closet and duct tape him into it. And at the same time, a big, like, storm is brewing. But another thing that adds to the dread of this is the kids notice that this entire island is suddenly surrounded by what even the kids can identify as, like, Navy ships.
Military vessels. But not, like, near the coast. They're, like, off the coast of the town. They're nowhere near the island.
Yeah, but so basically you as the reader understand, like, that, oh, clearly there's military surrounding this island. The kids know that, like, something's not right. And it's like you feel, like, scared for them because it's, like, a very familiar feeling of, like, knowing that something is off. You can't identify it necessarily, but, like, something's wrong and it's bad. And that's, like, and there's, like, this unknown, like, sort of terror that is that, and then combined with the sort of known terror of, like, murder worms that are, like, in the cabin that you're supposed to be
and not just murder worms, general survival, because they have no way of getting off the island. The boat that the Hungry Man came in is pretty much broken until the end of the book, when they find spark plugs,
right? But, and they took a ferry that won't come back until, like, the end of the weekend because there is supposed to be some sort of crazy storm rolling in.
So now
they're stuck there, and they know that, and it's so terrifying. But yeah, so basically, the book goes through a series of events that leads to after they, like, capture Tim and put their only adult into the closet, just out of just pure, like, hubris, Kent, big tough jock Kent, like, takes a swig of the whiskey that Tim had been drinking, which naturally now is filled with worms.
Womp womp.
And so womp womp, Kent gets infected, and we get this, like, what I think Kent's story might be one of the most terrifying ones, because it's like his whole arc is going from absolute confidence to just, like, absolute desperation so fast.
Yeah, like eating bugs, desperation, like, just,
like
dirt and twigs, whatever.
Like, it's like when you're a kid, where you have that, like, every kid sort of has that, like, I'm invincible sort of mentality, but, like, I can't say for sure because I was not a jock when I was growing up, but I would imagine that, like, the jocks of the world, you get, like, a another couple layers of invincibility like applied to your psyche, right?
I grew up with kids who may literally have been invincible at the time. I've seen those guys like, run through drywall and shit like that, like just seemingly superhuman feats of resilience, and I'm like, damn, you're 12.
Yeah. And watching him go from the top, the king of the hill, to just becoming just like fucking Gollum, essentially. Like he goes 100%. He goes full Schmeagol. Like he's eating bugs in the basement, and he's like, I'm just so hungry, to the point where like we actually learned that like the which is one of the creepiest things, these the conqueror worm worms its way. It sort of like crawls its way up your spine into your brain stem, and then can start to make you see things that aren't real in order to propagate itself. Because like there's scenes where Kent, when he's in like full final stages of like worm infestation, where the lines are like, we cut back to Kent's point of view, and he's like, I'm invincible, like Kent is the strongest he's ever been, and he's like ready to like kill all the campers and be like, take charge, and then run across the water back to the mainland. And then it cuts back to the point of view of the other kids, and Kent is just like a skeleton, just like slowly crawling his way across the floor, doing like nothing. And it's like, oh, it's so scary, dude. Like just like how this thing can even make you see the world differently, and for the sole purpose of just getting it, like just feeding itself, like,
just more, that's the only purpose that it has, is more everything, more worms, more food, more people, more.
So like Kent gets infected. Ephraim like has a confrontation with him where he like fucking punches the shit out of him, because Ephraim, and everybody, but Ephraim especially, because he's the angry kid, is like so sick of Kent's bullshit that he like punches the fuck out of him, and like so hard that he cuts his own knuckles, right? And then there's like a whole arc where now Ephraim, and this is like exacerbated by serial killer in the making, Shelley. Shelley is like, oh hey, I think I saw something crawl into your knuckles after you beat him up. And it's never like explicitly stated, but I think it's probably safe to assume that Ephraim is not sick at any point during the story, but he becomes so paranoid that he gets to the point where he lets Shelley trick him into like cutting himself open to try and like pull the worms out of him that he thinks are there.
He's slicing himself all over because he thinks he sees all these things wriggling in him, so he starts cutting himself open to try and pull the worms out.
Oh yeah, and he's like not even just cutting himself, but like reaching into the cuts and trying to grab stuff. To the point where eventually he is convinced to douse himself in kerosene and light himself on fire to burn away the worms. And it's just like, that might be the one point where I was like, well, I don't know if I'd be that desperate. That's where I'd go back to being like, well, maybe they can live with me. I don't think I'd ever burn myself alive. But I appreciate
fucked up.
Yeah, I appreciate the depths of horror that Nick Cutter is willing to subject to his children in his story,
That's the other thing. I love an author who's not afraid to kill these kids.
Yeah, and he's not, dude. These kids go. Because then after that, because we get we get an interesting series of chapters with Shelley, who is, again, he's the creepy kid. And like I've just said, he's a budding sociopath. He's a murderer. He's a serial killer in the making. He's already a sociopath.
He is the kid that every mom warns you about. He's the kid who's picking, the wings off a fly, who's lighting a mouse on fire for fun,
How many chapters did we have to hear about how he loved, squishing bugs' eyeballs?
Yeah, it was one of those things I noticed, early on. I'm like, okay, so he's that kid who, has to, hurt, bugs and little animals. All right, he's that kid. And then he very quickly, graduates to, oh, I am a killer. I, to hurt things. I like to manipulate people. He uses his like psychopathic and sociopathic traits to manipulate the situation, not even necessarily in his favor, but just to entertain himself. Like what we said before, he convinces the kid to slice himself open and light himself on fire. Like, he later on convinces one of the kids that he's bringing them food. Meanwhile, he's bringing them like dead bugs and scraps of like garbage for them to eat.
Yeah, because he plays with Kent a lot and says like, "Oh, I'll bring you food," and he even like says like, "Oh, here, I got you some noodles," and it's just the worms from the dead worms from the Scoutmaster, and he makes the kid eat them.
More worms, gross.
And it's more worms. Yeah, so we get a chapter where he describes like how he killed his family cat, like by just drowning it in the bathtub while his mom was like out doing errands, and it's like, all right,
repeatedly, not once, repeatedly.
Yeah. Yeah, repeatedly. And yeah, so those are the moments in the book that are like pretty brutal. Like, that's the first of a couple animal cruelty moments. There's another animal cruelty moment where it's actually outside of the context of the island, where the Dr. Edgerton has placed a conqueror worm inside of a chimpanzee, and it's sort of like an hour by hour, even like a half hour by half hour, like breakdown of the chimpanzees, like
just updates
behavior.
Of the downfall of this chimpanzee. It's very analytical, it's very scientific, it's very clinical, it's clear cut. It's so horrifying. Yeah, sterile, exactly.
It's a horrifying, sterile analysis of like this complete just annihilation of this creature, and it really feels terrible. Eric like messaged me. He was like, "Oof, the chimpanzee scene."
Yeah, the chimpanzee scene was super gross. It was tough to get through.
Yeah,
but
not as rough as the turtle scene, which was
the turtle.
So after so basically
much farther
after Max and Newt end up being like our actual two main characters. So Newt being the nerd, who is also really interesting because like he's a nerdy kid, but he like spends his time at home like living vicariously through an online profile he created.
It's catfish. He's just a catfish kid.
He's catfishing, but he's using the photos of his cousin who died, because he was like his cousin was like popular and funny and like attractive.
He's a Chad. His cousin's a fucking Chad.
But he was so stupid that he fell asleep in a field, and then a like tiller drove over him and splattered him all over the farmland.
What does he say? He's like, yeah, he tried to get up and run away in time, but he couldn't outrun the tiller because it's 80 feet of blades. I was like, oof.
Oh, what a horror story. That alone is like a short horror story by itself.
Closed casket. Dead.
But so Newt uses his dead cousin's profile to like catfish people to like, you know, feel better about himself. And then so Newt's our one main character, Max is the other. Max again being the son of the local coroner, and kind of like the guy he doesn't really have anything particularly to like identify as. You can't be like, oh, he's this stereotype, you know. He's just like, no,
he's just a very even keel, normal, pretty average boy.
Yeah.
I think Newt, going back to like the thing with his cousin, Newt uses this kind of situation almost in a way to experiment, maybe not even super consciously, like as an initiative, but he is consulting in himself throughout the book, like, okay, what would my cousin do? What would my cousin do? Because he uses him as kind of like his guiding light, because he's not particularly happy with himself, obviously. So he's trying to kind of role play what his cousin would do to be effectual in this situation.
Yeah, I think he like names the profile like Alex Masters or something, and he does like WWAMD, like what would Alex Masters do like in this situation, and he does that like multiple times in the book. But he does, but to great effect, because I mean honestly, the situation would have gone to shit even faster if it wasn't for Newt, the only one who's doing anything in this book. He's like he's the nerdy kid, but like he's the only effective character who's like doing anything productive at any given moment. Like Ephraim is like busy, like having a complete mental breakdown, you know, which I totally understand because I have health anxiety. I basically go through Ephraim's story arc like every other week.
I'm full of worms.
Yeah, I'm like, that again. That's why this intro didn't work, because I went to YouTube and went, nope. You know, like, so nobody, like, Kent's an asshole. He gets infected immediately. Ephraim's a psychopath. Like, Max is just like, I don't know, what do we do? And so Newt is the only one who's like really doing anything proactive. To the point where Max and Newt end up being like, after Ephraim dies, because he douses himself in kerosene and lights himself on fire, and Newt is scuttling around the island being a crazy person, and
Shelley.
Ephraim is just or Shelley, yeah, sorry, Shelley is scuttling around the island, and then Kent is infected and he's just in a basement somewhere where they locked him. So we end up only really having Max and Newt to interact with for a while, and that's where they kind of have to kick on their survival instincts, and this is where we get the sad turtle scene, right? Because that's where they find like a turtle who's caught in a tide pool, and they go, well, we have to eat. Maybe like this is our chance to get some food. We'll get this turtle, and they sort of like do this sad scene where they drag this turtle, again, trigger warning, they drag this turtle like out of the tide pool, and like these kids are just dragging this giant sea turtle like onto the beach, where they like try to just like stab it and kill it, but like it just won't, they can't do it efficiently because they're kids. They don't know really what they're doing, and also
they don't know how to field dress a turtle.
Right. And so they're just trying to like kill the shit out of it, and the turtle is like screaming and just trying to get away, and these kids are crying because they're like, we don't want to fucking do this anymore. We just want to go home. And it's probably one of the saddest things I've ever read in my life.
It took me back to like reading Where the Red Fern Grows.
Yes. Oh,
because
my God.
It's just like this animal in complete agony, and the kids are like, we don't want to do this either, and then they end up not even being able to bring themselves to eat the turtle, because of how poorly this execution goes, and they bury it in the sand, and then they're like, all right, well, I guess that's that. They're sitting on the sand for a couple minutes, and they start hearing these cheeping noises, and they realize that the turtle got stuck in the tide pool because it had gone up and laid its eggs on the beach. So now these eggs are hatching, and they at least make like the effort to go, all right, all of these turtles are getting in the ocean. We fucked up. We need to surrogate these fucking turtles to safety.
Yeah, and it's actually one of the most like one of the more beautiful things I've read in a long time, because it's like you go from like a scene of such brutality to, and like just sad, to like such a like hopeful scene, you know, where these two kids are not friends. Like even by the end of the book, they're not really friends, but they start off, you know, Newt's definitely not anyone's friend, but like I love seeing this sort of like respect for Newt that Max gains, like as he observes. He's like, oh shit, this kid is like, eventually he comes to terms with himself and goes, oh, you know, who cares if he likes nerdy shit? Like he's the only one here who's like capable.
Yeah, this is
new...
one of those kind of dynamics where I definitely recognized, parts of my experience being in the Scouts, because, like, you're in a group of like 30 kids, and like you don't really like get to spend one-on-one time with all of them. And then, there could be a weird kid that you get paired with one day, and all of a sudden you're like, oh, this kid's not as bad as everyone else makes them seem. Like, this kid's only as bad as everyone making fun of him is. Like, this kid's actually, like, pretty chill, kind of normal. Like, I could get along with this guy, like, outside of this setting. Right. But you're just so used to that person getting, like, torn apart in the group dynamic that you're like, fuck that guy, he's a loser.
Yeah. And just like there's this like slow little story arc between Max and Newt. I found like really nice and really believable, and it just like it really pulls you through the rest of the novel. Nick Cutter does a really good job of like making these two kids like you really want them to pull through. The other kids, you're like, yeah, well, they're crazy, and one's mean, one's crazy.
I mean, at that point, there's so few kids left that you're just like, please, can these two please get out of this?
Yeah, right, exactly. So then eventually, they determine like, I think Max is like, oh, hey, turns out I remember when I was doing that autopsy on the hungry guy with Scoutmaster that, like, I think those were spark plugs in his stomach. The ones, like, he probably ate them when he got off the boat, and that's why the boat doesn't have spark plugs. But I remember seeing them in there, which was a little far-fetched, I think, but, like, not so far that I'm like, I'm out of the book, Like, I was like, okay, whatever. Because he did make a point.
If you tell me that guy's guts are full of, like, springs and screws and other things he's stripped off of, like, spark plugs aren't just, like, on top of the motor where you can chomp on them. Like, you gotta open that bitch up and, like, find them.
Also, just to go back again to that turtle scene just a little bit, Nick Cutter does have I don't have the whole quote, but, to paraphrase, he does, like, a really good job of, he has this, like, little tiny like sort of mini monologue about how like Max is thinking about how like living creatures will just do like they'll just do anything to survive.
Yeah.
Like and it's like it's like a really powerfully written
how they don't know when to die. Like, yeah, no matter what, like, the desperation will push you forward, even when, like, there's zero hope, and that he wishes, like, the turtle would just know that it's over and the turtle would die. Mm-hmm. They have that kind of scenario, like, a lot of people in similar situations find themselves, where they resort to an act of, like, violence and execution, and they realize, like, oh, it's not like the TV and the movies. You don't just stab a guy and he dies. You have to stab a turtle 45 times in the chest, and then it might still be wheezing. Like, it might still be alive. Because all life is fighting to, remain alive.
Yeah, and I loved that little passage that he did. It was like, it was intense.
It's cool. I think it was really nice because it highlighted the hope, like, within the kids and the turtle and, like, everything as a whole, but also highlighted the terror of, like, the worm problem, because they are doing the exact same thing. Like, if their only goal and mission in life is to suck a human dry and die, they are still continuing to, fulfill that life and that goal, regardless of whether or not it, like, kills them.
Yeah, it's scary. But yeah, so eventually, like, they determine they have to go find spark plugs, and they go and they find them. They rifle through the guy's guts and they find him, and then they go and they do a weird thing where they just dry them out on a rock and then fall asleep, and then they wake up and they're not there, and then the kids have to, like, go, well, all right, who could possibly have taken them? And I'm like, well, there's only one option left, guys. because in a separate scene, Shelley had drowned Kent. He like dragged like the skeleton of Kent out into the water and was like, oh, now that I'm free to do what I want on this island, because I don't think I'm ever getting out of here, because look at those military ships off the coast.
He realizes there are no repercussions.
Yeah, so he just goes, well, let's see what I drowned a cat once and that was great. What's it going to be like to drown Kent? And so he drowns Kent, and then like as he's drowning him, Kent's like head explodes and worms, like, because he's drowning him in the ocean, like Shelley's like waist deep in the ocean, and worms like pour out of Kent's head. And there's a really gross description about how like Shelley is like so like horny for murdering.
Oh, there's a lot of talk about this kid Shelley's penis. An insane amount of talk of this kid's like junk rubbing up against his jeans.
Oh yeah,
which highlights his depravity, but like oh man, it was gross. I was just like, this is the fifth time we've touched on this subject in this chapter.
Yep, that boy likes to killin'. And he's so horny for murder that while he's drowning Kent, he doesn't realize the literal sea foam of worms that has poured out of his skull that, again, talk about his penis, proceed to swarm around him and swim up his penis.
Every orifice available, these worms are in it, they're on it, about it.
Yeah, and so Shelley becomes, like, instantly, like, level 100 infected, right? Because like all the other people in this book sort of like get the slow build up, but Shelley he goes like 1 to 1,000,000 like infected in like instantly, because so many worms get inside of him.
So like you know in Dune how he becomes the worm?
Yeah.
Well, in this the worm becomes Shelley.
Yeah, it really is. It's pretty disgusting, and he even does a great job of like saying like writing out the weird noises that Shelley makes, and like for some reason I very vividly could like hear those noises the way he wrote them.
Yeah, I'm telling you, he's got a good job of like sense experience writing.
Yeah, he wrote it very vividly for me, and I was very disturbed by that scene. So, like, Shelley's level 1,000,000 infected by worms, and he has now stolen the spark plugs because he's scrambling around the island trying to do more murder. And the kids go to sleep, they wake up, they're not there, so they go, oh, we have to find him. And they are able to use their, like, scout techniques to, like, track him, like, through the island and find that he's in this, like, cave that is like a perfect setting for like a final confrontation for a horror movie. They go down there and they even light a flare, so that means in your head everything is like
red,
brightly lit in red, and it means like if you were streaming this as a movie, your stream would like look like garbage because they can't handle red, and you'd be like, what's happening? And so they go in. And like they find the spark plug just kind of laid out in the middle of this like opening in this cave, and like he describes how like Newt turns around and Shelley like unfolds himself like fucking Jack Skeleton in the beginning of Nightmare Before Christmas, like goes and he's just like nothing but bones and like a huge distended stomach, and there's like a big confrontation, and eventually the kids are about to get out, but then like Newt gets grabbed by Shelley, and Shelley's stomach bursts open, and Newt just gets covered in worms. And guess what? I think they swim up his pee hole too. I think we get 2 pee hole swimmers in this book. And so unfortunately, the kid who I thought was gonna survive, I thought, but I should have known better. He was too.
He's just Piggy. He's our Lord of the Flies Piggy stand-in. You had to know he was getting clobbered by a boulder or something.
I know. I just thought maybe he'd make it, but he was too proficient at his job, and he took the hit from Max. he gets infected. Max eventually goes back to go get the spark plugs that they left there because they just ran out in horror. And like Shelly's still just like a dead skeleton. But the spark plugs are like in a middle of like a pool. And as he goes to grab them, you get like a really cool description of a scene where the worms sort of like coalesce together and create like a big giant worm to try and like crawl at Max. And it's just like, so these worms are so scary, dude. Yeah, he gets out, he makes his way back to Newt. They take the boat and they sail out as far as they can. And then you want to
they get intercepted. The blockade on the island kind of advances towards them, and they're stopped by a military ship, and they're trying to wave down the ship, and unfortunately Newt says, "I'm so hungry. I'm so hungry."
I loved that.
And Newt takes a fucking shot right to the head. One of these snipers on the boat takes him out. We find out later that all of the military personnel have been briefed with a specific set of like kind of keywords or like trigger words, and if any of the people come off the island saying it, that they
like if they say the word hungry,
dead. Which is like a total catch-22 because they've been on the island for like days by themselves. Of course they're gonna be fucking hungry. There's like no way out of it.
Sorry. No, yeah.
So yeah, they fucking light him up like a Christmas tree. He's dead. And then they take Max, and Max gets put into like pretty much like a glass cell for like the rest of his life because they can't determine whether or not he has worms or not. It's not the rest of his life. I think it's like 10 years or something, 12 years.
So I don't know if they give a specific amount of time, but he does get released. And so the end of the book is once Max is finally released, he, I think the final like line sort of adds up to he sails back to Falstaff Island where this all took place, because he has a desperate hunger. And like that's how the book ends, is like Max is hungry. And so obviously he's not like infected by these worms because I don't think that's what the book's trying to say. Because obviously he wouldn't have been able to leave. Which brings us, so that's the end of the book, and I think it's a great ending. So that brings us to one thing I wanted to talk about, which is what do you think the theme of the book is? I think it's pretty easy. I think you and I have both watched some videos that like touch on it.
Yeah, I kind of come to the conclusion prior to, but I did watch someone talking about it where they very kind of plainly stated like all of the kids who go to the island, pretty much all negative ways, self-actualize while they're there.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Other than Newt, who is like, oh, like I'm self-actualizing to be a braver, more forward outgoing, positive person. Unfortunately, as a result, it makes him more risk prone because he's taking more risks and he's trying to be more adventurous and brave and strong. And that doesn't pan out particularly well from him. But all of the other, kids in the story are like learning something about themselves, and it ultimately leads to their demise. And Max does not. Max leaves the island without really attaining that kind of like. He doesn't have any
change.
Yeah, he doesn't. It doesn't alter him on a like core level. Like obviously it fucks him up, it gives him a ton of trauma to deal with, but he doesn't seem to self-actualize in any way. So I think that hunger is him trying to figure out like why did all of them change and I didn't change.
Right, exactly. Yeah, I think we watched the same video, and I think that's the perfect way to put it. So this book is it's a coming of age book. It's about finding yourself. It's about self-actualization. all the characters, like Ephraim struggles with like anger. He's worried about becoming his father the whole book. He takes control of his fate, by like, he goes, well, this thing that's inside of me, like whether I'm sure it's there or not,
destroying
like,
me.
I'm going to take control and end it, literally. In the case of this book, Shelley finally gets to let go of his inhibitions, and just gets to become the killer that is like
Degenerate little freak murderer.
Kent has always been like a cocky, headstrong guy. So he was already kind of like self-actualized by that point, but he does get taken down a peg, which is nice to see.
Well, the problem is that he comes into his own by putting the Scoutmaster like kind of to rest. He's the one who goes out of his way to be like, we need to quarantine this motherfucker and kill him. Like, we need to get rid of this guy because he's gonna be a problem for us. And then he becomes the leader. As a result, he screws himself over with the victory drink.
Yeah, and exactly. So Max is the only character who doesn't have any fundamental change over the course of the book, and I agree. I think that's what that the book ends with him going back to the island because he's hungry, and it's because he didn't get out of it what everybody else did. For better.
Personally, I think it's for better. I think, you know what? If you didn't get what those guys got, that's fine. Go do some other life-changing experience that doesn't involve like
go play a game or
worms
something.
Dead children.
Just play some Fortnite or whatever. Like, get over it.
Sign up for a game show.
I actually do think that it's a beautiful and sort of like haunting way to end that, though.
Yeah. Could you imagine being one of those townspeople and you see him like rent a boat and then you're like, where are you going, bro? Like, what are you doing?
I know, right?
After they leave the island, the military fucking like just destroys it. They like napalm strike it like 4 or 5 times. Like literally they go out and find napalm to use on this island.
Which they reference as being very hard to source.
And they pour a bunch of chemicals into the surrounding water that like kills everything. The algae, the plants, the marine life. They just fucking barren wasteland the water.
Yep. Which is, I don't know if is that actually something, it has to be something that's possible to do, but have we ever actually done that in like... I
don't know of any off the top of my head, but I'm sure we have enough terrible chemicals to put in the water that just kills shit.
I'm sure, yeah.
We do it to pools. Why not, just bigger scale.
But yeah, I actually really liked that scene where they describe how just like scorched earth they go on this island. But I guess one final thing I have to say is I think that the worms and Shelley are like a perfect symbiotic villain for this story.
Yeah.
Like I think Shelley is the way he wrote him is exactly what this story needed, and they're like, so like Shelley he's such a great villain for this particular like creature, like to go side by side with, because like Shelley's already sort of like living with a worm inside him. Like he's like a normal kid, maybe he's a little odd, but he's like a regular kid on the outside. But like just underneath, like there's literally a killer like wriggling around beneath the surface, like making him hungrier and hungrier to act out like these deep-seated fucking murderous impulses. And once he becomes infected with the worms, he becomes like final form Frieza Shelley, and is able to like become like this ultimate devourer. And I think it's like it was such a poetic way to like bring both of those like storylines together.
Yeah, and
I absolutely loved it.
There's lots of comparisons between the worm and Shelley you can draw, because like if you think about the way the worm works, it like goes inside and it like hangs out deep, dark in your guts and stays there and festers. And Shelley does the same thing, like, socially within the group. He's, like, looking for these little fractures in, like, the social norms of the group, and he's, like, fracking them. And then, he'll slowly, like, kind of slink away into the darkness and then come back and, essentially feed and grow from the resulting trauma of him fucking shit up. Like,
yeah, and
he's like this dormant little cell within their little group that just blooms out into this terrible, terrible killing machine.
It's such a good 1-for-1 with, like, serial killers. Like, it was so, I think, well illustrated, and it wasn't, like, overt. You did have to, like, maybe, like, sit back for, like, a minute and, like, think about the comparison. Like, it just, like, it didn't ever feel forced,
It gave you food for thought.
It was a very, yeah. and it needs a lot of food.
But that's the truth.
But that's the truth. Great story, great book. Hopefully you read it, and even if you listen to us talk about it all this time, hopefully you still go read it, because it's worth it, even if you know exactly what happens. Because the prose, we couldn't even come close to, aside from me, the couple of passages I directly read, like, we can't do it justice. It really is a brilliantly written book. I hope you check it out. I hope you like it. That being said, we here at the Devil's Cut have an announcement, right, for the upcoming
Yes, we have
season.
a very interesting little parasite growing within us. We're going to...
Oh, a little worm of our own.
We talked about it a little bit on the Children of the Corn episode, but we did a little bit more digging, and we've come to the realization that Amityville Horror has probably the most sequels, official and unofficial, of any franchise I've ever heard of. Unofficially, they have 16 movies to the Amityville lore, and officially they have like 9.
So what we are announcing, tentatively announcing, right? Like, it's
announcing. We're announcing.
So 2023 the summer of 2023 is going to be Amityville Summer. For June, July, and August, we're going to be doing an episode each month where we're going to cover and discuss 3 of the Amityville movies in succession, with a possible end of summer, September release where we do a bonus episode talking about some of our favorite non-official Amityville movies.
I mean, they really run the gamut.
Amityville Wolf, Amityville Werewolf, Amityville in Space. Who knows?
But that is some summer fun you have to look forward to. We're going to be slipping those episodes in throughout the different months of the summer. And I think we might be having a guest or two along the way to endure the Amityville onslaught.
Yeah, I think it's something they're going to have to suffer through. But, it'll be fun for everybody involved, especially you listeners. And I think that's it for now. We can go on to our final cuts. I don't know, is there a sound effect for the final cut transition, or you just kind of let it roll?
No, we just final cut.
Okay, final cut. No sound effect. Sorry, guys. Do you have anything in particular you wanted to?
I do.
About?
There's been lots of talk surrounding the Nightmare on Elm Street franchise, because I guess they just dropped some new documentary, and the question was brought to, Robert Englund again on whether or not he'll be reprising Freddy.
Let him rest.
He's been saying it for years now. I feel like he's been saying it for close to a decade, but he's too old, he's too stiff, he's too thick. That's it. That's his phrasing. He's too thick.
Too old, too stiff, too sick. Love it.
And this has kind of prompted within the horror sphere a slew of, fan castings of people kind of being like, oh, I want this guy and I want that guy. I want this person to be Freddy. And I don't usually go for fan casting. I think it's really cringy. It's usually a bunch of just poorly associated, like, it girls of that week being applied to whatever role, boy and girl. And but I did happen to notice within all of this Friday the 13th talk that Devin Sawa... Oh, yeah, excuse me. Nightmare on Elm Street. But Devin Sawa had thrown his hat in the ring via Twitter.
Devin Sawa from Idle Hands. He's throwing himself in the ring for he's throwing the towel or throwing his hat in.
He said he would be very interested in giving it a shot, and I was like, I don't know if I hate the idea, but I did not expect that to come out of left field.
That is quite a left field play. Do you have a? Did you have anybody in particular? Again, you said you don't like the fan casting, but did you?
No, I didn't have anyone specifically in mind.
But now you're thinking Devin.
But now it just it got my brain moving. I'm like, could he do it though? Like those are big sweaters to fill. That's a lot of charisma you got to bring to that role. Big
gloves. Yeah, it's tough.
The big glove.
I don't know if I. Yeah, you know what? I had you posted about this on the Discord earlier, and my first instinct, I was like, if what actors do I know that I think would like fit based on what I've seen them perform in, what I think would be able to do it. And I could only really, my gut instinct, which is something that would never, ever happen, and also it is kind of your, like, it girl sort of thing that annoys you.
Let me guess before you say it. Is it the guy who plays Terrifier? Art the Clown? Okay.
No.
Because I saw that one get thrown out a lot.
No. Somebody who I think has, like, the comedic and dramatic chops that could really hit all and the highest of high and lowest of low notes. I think we should call in Bryan Cranston to be Freddy Krueger. I think we need Walter White. Bring Walter White in.
Oh.
I think he could do it. He's funny as shit, and we know he's funny as shit. But he's also got any other vibe you need him to hit, that dude's capable of hitting it. And you know what? We need to give him a role that isn't just Walter White again.
That is some big firepower for the Nightmare franchise. That'd be interesting. On the spot, you, that was a pretty good pull.
He's got a build that fits. He's not too scrawny. He's not too thick. He's kind of got that middle-aged guy who worked at a preschool kind of body.
What's his name in Malcolm in the Middle? Stu?
I don't remember. Malcolm
it's not Stu.
Senior. But I'm telling you, man, like he only gets cast as because like right now he's starring in that show Your Honor, which is just Breaking Bad but with lawyers instead of like instead of meth dealers, and it's like he just keeps getting cast in these same roles over and over because they only know him now. Hollywood only knows him as the Breaking Bad guy, but I'm seeing what he can do and I'm trying to apply it to because Freddy Krueger needs to be funny.
Hal,
right?
His name is Hal. Which is why, thank you,
Hal. But yeah, Freddy Krueger needs to be funny, so we know he can do that, separate of any Breaking Bad, involvement. Like,
I can definitely see it. The more we talk about it, it's some gears are turning.
I think Hollywood needs to explore this more because that's my pick. The more I think I've convinced myself. I was apprehensive about bringing it up to you, but now that I've gone through the loop, I've convinced myself, and this is my idea. He should be the next Freddy Krueger.
What about you? What kind of final cuts you got? Because I'm about to pee my pants.
All right. Real quick for me, nothing too crazy. I've after reading The Troop, I'm back into reading horror novels. I've kind of recommitted to my endeavor of reading all the Stephen King books in publication order. Right now, I am on his first short story collection, The Night Shift, and it is going very well. It is the collection that contains Boogeyman, which is a movie that will be coming out relatively soon, which we will be covering future ep. Stay tuned. I haven't read that particular story yet, but I look forward to it. But I gotta say, the first half of the book, very good. There's like a spooky story about rats that I think that Guillermo del Toro show ripped directly from. I just finished reading a particular story called I Am the Doorway about a guy who travels to Venus on a deep space exploration program and comes back and starts growing little eyeballs on the palms of his hands that seem to be making him do things he doesn't want to do. And that was very creepy for me, and I did not like it. I liked it, but I did not like it. The palms and the tips and the back, all over his hands. Lots of eyes all over his hands.
Eyes on the hands.
Which is terrifying.
Difficult to hold things.
Well, he grows them on his hands, and then he's convinced that they made him murder somebody. And so to save the world, because he thinks the aliens are controlling him through his hands, he lights them on fire and burns the eyeballs off. But then at the end of the story, he tells us that, well, that was all a long time ago, but it's okay. My hands are burnt, but I can still use them to put the gun in my mouth because I'm going to be ending it. He goes, because I'm going to be ending it because last week 12 eyeballs grew in a circle on my chest, so I'm going to end it.
Oh, that's a very good Stephen King Twilight Zone kind of ending.
It is, right, isn't it? So Stephen King is so Twilight Zone-y, but almost all the stories in that book are like that. Very good. It's because it's early King stuff, which we didn't mention too much, but if you like Stephen King, specifically early Stephen King, The Troop definitely will scratch that itch. So another reason to go back and read that. But otherwise, that's it for me. I think that's another successful episode of The Devil's Cut. Thank you for joining us. As always, you can check the links in the description to follow us on Twitter, follow us on Instagram. You can catch us streaming every Monday and Thursday on Twitch. Right now, we're working through Resident Evil. Right now, we're doing Resident Evil 4, but we're working our way through the series. We plan on playing all sorts of other horror games. And again, follow, subscribe, leave us reviews, email us, message us on Twitter if there's something you want us to talk about. If there's any topic in everyone's favorite genre that you want to hear us discuss, we're probably open to talking about it. So reach out. We'd love to hear
us some book suggestions. We'd like to do some more book episodes. We're trying to branch out from the movies and the visual mediums. So let us know.
Yeah. And with that, everybody just keep on creeping it real. We'll catch you next time on The Devil's Cut.